Hi guys, welcome back to the weird side of YouTube. I'm your host, author DC Connect, and today we're doing another book reading for Halloween, my third and final horror story, Voiceless. I also wrote this when I was like 19 or 20 as a way to heal from my mom's homophobia. It is less horror, more gothic romance thriller, but I think it's really pretty and cute, and I hope you guys do too. Let's get weird. Weird. Voiceless. Prologue. Enraptured. I could never say no to Simon Maximilian Montgomery. He was my weakness and my strength, my desire and my fear, my passion and my sorrow. My body had been aching for his for an untold number of years, for my hands would tremble so when I tried in vain to sign the words to him. And though he was mute, he spoke to me on a much deeper level than even the most enlightened scholars of the English language could ever hope to convey. From the moment our young wide eyes met on that fated first day in kindergarten, I knew that he was always going to be my very best friend. He was supposed to have been put into a school for students that communicated like him, but that was one of the many things that my simple southern hometown was severely lacking. Our elementary school didn't even have classes or teachers that specified in helping children like him. This caused countless issues for us. Because the teachers didn't know sign language, they didn't understand when he had a question about the curriculum or had to use the restroom. I remember the day he urinated on himself in the middle of arts and crafts time. Our peers never let him live that down. When his mother complained, the principal suggested that they take him to a school that could take care of him. His parents simply couldn't afford it. Even when he was crying and desperately signing about being bullied by the other students, the teachers ignored him. Out of 20 other students, I was the only one who offered him my friendship. With my help and his parents' devotion, he learned to write and read before everyone else in our peer group. Gifted with the ability to draw, he began to create art for me. It was such a shame that no one else ever got to see how incredibly intelligent and sweet he was, although I'm certain that they wouldn't have appreciated it as much as I did. By the second grade, I had finally mastered American Sign Language. This helped us to grow incredibly close. I began to help him with his schoolwork even more by explaining concepts to him that he couldn't comprehend just by hearing them said aloud. In high school, the sun of my innocence began to set. His physicality became a more prominent focal point for me. Taking great enjoyment from exercise in gym class, his arms and legs began to swell in muscularity. I would lose myself in lustful trances watching the water flow down his broad pectorals and abdominal muscles as we showered in the locker room. The way the dimples in his cheeks would show when he smiled at me, how his gray eyes would glimmer when I would sign to him, the way he would spike his short blonde hair, it all took my breath away. Just being around him was like riding a roller coaster. Only when I was brought back to reality did I begin to question these fantasies and dread their inevitable consequences. Our small southern hometown was infected with the fervent cancer of hatred. Homophobia, racism, and misogyny had been passed down like family heirlooms for centuries, making it an impossible battle to fight. It didn't seem as if Sai had caught this illness. He was never mean or judgmental to anyone, but I was too afraid to risk losing him, so I suffered in silence. When he made art for me, a beautiful warmth would rise within my very core, sending echoes of bliss throughout my veins. I wanted to make him feel that way too, but writing was my only creative skill. I tried to pen a few pieces for him, but they always turned into heated and sensual love poems. Because I was afraid of his reaction, I decided not to give them to him. Like all other boys, he would express how pretty he thought some of our female peers were, but never in a vulgar way. It made me feel inadequate, as if there was something wrong with me. I found them to be beautiful as well, but not in a sexual manner. My attraction to women was based on their strength, intelligence, and personality. Some days, however, Sai would make me question his sexuality entirely. He would always praise my writing and use of metaphor. Sometimes he would even compliment my blue eyes running his fingers through my short auburn hair. His touch would always cause a strange chemical reaction within me. Besides blushing and trembling like an autumn leaf, I wasn't sure how to respond, so I never did. I would find myself just staring and smiling as he read a book or listened to music. His face was a sunset over a field of flowers, his heart the moon rising over the ocean. and his gray and glimmering eyes were that of a sparkling winter snow. Although he never said anything, I was certain that he noticed my silent staring. It wasn't as if I could hide the way my face lit up when he came around. He seemed to fill every shadow with the brightest and warmest light. I never really stood a chance. In the middle of this era of breathlessness and silent desire, he was finally put into a class for differently abled students. However, the teacher didn't even know sign language. Even worse, around this time, the bullying increased dramatically. When I tried to take up for him, he reacted in ire, demanding me to let him fight his own battles. My heart shattered on a daily basis as I watched him struggle with such darkness, but I respected his decision and did as he asked. Eventually, the bullying spread to me just for associating with him. The difference was that I couldn't keep my mouth shut. A month's worth of detention was my punishment for taking up for myself. Black eyes and busted lips were my daily souvenirs. One night after such a battle, while my father congratulated me for acting like a man, Cy cried and begged me to stop seeing him so that the bullies would leave me alone. Seeing the tears cascading down his beautiful porcelain face was destructive to my young, untouched heart. In the sanctuary in my bedroom, I couldn't help but wrap my arms around him and kiss his lips for the very first time. This surprised the both of us. Our faces reddened, we pulled away from each other. With nervous, trembling hands, I signed that I loved him. He slowly mirrored my movements. That was enough for the both of us. We eased into one another and pressed our lips together again. Asphyxiated by my own desire, I lost myself within him that night as we shared everything with one another. Our fleeting youth, our undying love, our quivering hearts, our immortal souls, our awakened bodies. But we wanted more than just one evening of fiery passion. We wanted forever. I was finally able to share with him the love poems and romantic short stories that I had written. He kept them all in his notebook so that he could read them every day. Instead of video games and homework, our evenings began to consist of dates like movies and dinner. Although I was terrified of the consequence of public displays of affection, Cy would bravely push the limit at times. Nothing ever came of it. Besides exercising and creating art, his favorite pastime was listening to music. Specifically, his favorite sound was the strings, violins, violas, cellos, guitars. I had introduced him to a few symphonic metal bands that emphasized these orchestral instruments. He immediately fell in love with them all, but Mozart, Brahms, Beethoven, and Tchaikovsky were his eternal favorites. I adored communicating with him either through sign language, texting, or writing notes. No matter what we were doing, we never stopped conversing. Even at night when we were supposed to be sleeping, our endless conversations would range from aliens and spirituality to comic books and pop culture. It seemed there was nothing we couldn't talk about. My very best friend was now the one person I could not live without. His beauty was otherworldly. He was the laughter and the light of my every day and the sensual comfort of my every night, and I was deeply and dangerously in love with him. I'm not sure if he ever knew it or not, but I was always afraid of losing what we had. Even when he had Even when we had perfect days of laughter and lovemaking, there was always that shadow hanging over my head, that rose thorn pricking my finger, that haunting reminder that people didn't want us together. Sometimes it came in the form of terrifying nightmares, jolting me awake in the darkness, covering me in sweat as I cried uncontrollably. Perhaps I was prophesying it, or maybe I manifested it. Either way, the fear refused to leave me be. This concern was not mutual. He was more than secure in our relationship, or maybe he was just pretending because I needed to borrow some of his strength. I don't know. I question everything these days. Our last sleepover started like all others. We played video games and watched anime until we ended up play wrestling on the floor, where things became heated. Every time our lips met, it was like brightly colored fireworks were exploding in my heart. He couldn't make a sound with his mouth, but he sang to me when we made love. We lost ourselves in our emotions as we usually did, violently tearing the clothes from one another to try and get another taste of our most forbidden of fruits. This time, however, my father walked in on us, shattering the warmth of our sensuality with a glare that was icy and enraged. Sounding not unlike the bullies at school, he hurled insults at us before demanding that Cy call his parents and ask them to come pick him up. I'll always remember the thunderstorm of shame and terror in the glimmering gray eyes of my beloved as he threw his clothes back on. I could tell that he was incredibly uncomfortable with my father standing in the doorway, watching every movement like a hawk with its prey. As was I, though I was far too afraid of the tower of a man to say anything. I recall glancing over at my side after my mother punched me in the face. He looked as though he wanted to do something to help, but he was powerless. In silence and sorrow, he left me without so much as a kiss goodbye, abandoning me in that cold, lonesome, haunted house. My tears came until sunrise as my parents screamed in my face throughout the night. Trying to explain myself is what caused my mother to hit me in the first place, so I chose to remain completely silent. My father kept asking who put such sinful things into our heads. I knew the truth would just get me hit again, so like the Little Mermaid, I traded my voice in hopes of finding peace. My mother broke my phone, and my father told me that they were canceling the internet subscription. I was to become a recluse, hiding within my parents' house without any contact from or to the outside world. This was my punishment for loving someone in a way that they just weren't comfortable with. You're not gay, are you, son? My mother's voice was stern. It wasn't a question. She was simply demanding that I agree with her. I shook my head. Honestly, it was the only action I could make. My stomach was in knots, and I felt as though I could vomit at any second. Then I don't want you seeing him anymore. He's a bad influence. With that, she dismissed the subject by simply turning her attention back to the television. I sat on the couch across from her in the living room. The longer I stayed around her, the more nauseous I became. My lungs seemed to collapse under the weight of my thoughts. I needed some fresh air. I quickly threw on my tennis shoes. As my mother shot a bitter glare toward me, I flinched in fright. Although I did not meet her gaze with my own, I felt her judgment watching over me. Where are you going now? I knew that she didn't want an answer. Her questions were never really questions. I thought I'd go outside to clear my thoughts. Staring at the floor, I feared the enraged flames in her eyes. Although I refused to look at her, I knew she was full of wrath. The sound of her voice made me cringe. Fine, but you know what happens if I find out you're seeing him. I didn't actually have a clue what would happen. She had already taken everything away from me. Her fist made a lasting impression on my black and swollen eye. What more violence was she capable of? Admittedly, I was afraid to find out. My father just kept staring at me as if I were some sort of monster. He kept saying that he had lost his only son, as if me being gay had somehow completely erased my existence. As usual, his stern blue eyes and weathered face made no sign of emotion, but I could tell that he was judging every move I made. Neither my parents cared Neither of my parents cared how badly they broke my heart that cold and icy morning. I watched the fog appear in my front yard through the window of the living room as I sat in silence on the couch. For a little while after my father went to work, darkness built a wall between my mother and I. Masking her statement as a question, she repeated it in silence. I continued to shake my head. It was as if she were in denial, forcing me to tell her that I wasn't gay until we both believed it. You're not gay, are you, son? You're not gay, right? You know that being gay is an abomination to the Lord, our God, don't you, son? You know it's a sin, don't you? With every question, I felt my sanity slowly chipping away. My eyes were dry and swollen. Although I wanted to sleep, I knew that I wouldn't be able to at all. My stomach was churning far too much to let me rest. I was beginning to think that I wouldn't feel better until I threw up. Everything kept repeating in my mind. It was making me so very dizzy. All I wanted to do was pretend that it was all just a bad dream. Alas, I wasn't brave enough to believe my own lies. I knew that I was gay. I knew that I was in love with Sai. And I knew that my parents were forcing me back into the closet. I couldn't take being around my mother anymore. As I stepped toward the door, I swooned. Apparently, I was more exhausted than I thought. Despite this, I continued through the cold and empty dining room, staring at the chandelier as it hovered above the table. Passing by my jacket, which was wrapped around the back of a specific chair, I remained silent. In a few moments, I was outside. I felt the temperature immediately drop as I stepped out on the deck. The quilt of Arctic fog constricted me like a snake with its prey. It seemed to glow an eerie white reminiscent of a blizzard frozen in time. My breathing was slow and steady despite the fact that I was screaming on the inside. Trying to distract myself, I gazed down the long, winding driveway, imagining Sai's parents driving away as they did just hours before, with him sitting in the back seat and gazing longingly at me through the rear window. My panic rose as a thought entered my mind. I was never going to see him again. This was coupled with the fear that I now harbored for my parents and their hidden hatred for me. It was then that I began to vomit uncontrollably. Resting my hands on my knees, I doubled over as it splattered across the deck below. I felt it flood into my nose, burning my nostrils and halting my breathing. Its stench and atrocious taste filled me with even more sickness, but it wouldn't stop. My first anxiety attack was greatly defeating me. I collapsed onto my knees. As the heaving slowed to a stop, I wiped my mouth in silence. I gazed down at my liquid panic. Clenching my teeth, I became disgusted with myself. As I stood, I spat. The taste was lingering on my tongue, constantly reminding me of what my parents thought of me. I not only repulsed myself, I filled my own mother and father with complete and utter disgust. With the water from the hose pipe, I washed it away from the deck. If only my sickness could have dispersed along with it. I went back inside and in silence rushed toward the bathroom. I brushed my teeth and repeatedly rinsed with mouthwash, but the taste of vomit would not fade. Collapsing into the fetal position, I let the tears fall down my face. In that moment, my exhaustion won the battle, bathing me in the comfort of darkness and sorrow as I drifted off to sleep on the bathroom floor. That was the prologue of Voiceless. Again, I wrote this at like 19 to try and heal from my mom's abuse, but it's neither here nor there. It's based on a dream I had, a nightmare, really, at the time due to stress. But yeah, you can get special editions of this that'll be signed from prismaticdreams.com. It also comes with themed jewelry, just like my other physical copies. If you don't want to spend a big buck, you can get print-on-demand version for like $10, I think, on lulu.com. Link in description as well. But other than that, continue to enjoy Spooky Month. I have spooky videos all month long, but this is the last book reading. But I love you guys, and I'll see you guys next time. Bye.